Fiona, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
Hello, Robbie. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you on the show, and you came as a recommendation from one of the other guests, friend of the podcast, Marianne Craig, and she said of you, she's an inspirational public speaker and has a lovely Geordie accent as part of her recommendation to me. And so, I know the last is true already from just saying hello. And just as a little aside, actually, just while I think of it, we're recording this in August, and I'm just about to go. I haven't said this to you off air, but I'm just about to go over August to visit first my parents in North Yorkshire where they live, and then my wife's parents. And I can't wait to get out of the city. And when I was looking at where you live, because I'm curious about that kind of thing, you're very much within reach of one of my favourite parts of England, Northumberland. And I just had this flash when I was looking at that and reading about how much you connect with that part of the country, of kind of envy that you're so close to that amazing rugged coastline. Have you managed to get there during the last 18 months or so?
Oh yes, I moved back to the northeast after living away for about 9-10 years. I moved back to the northeast in 1997, and I would call myself a born-again Geordie, actually, because I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. I loved living in London and the other places that I've lived. But I absolutely love being back in the northeast. It's the most beautiful place, and if anybody who's listening has never been before, it's a great place to visit. We have everything. We have art, we have culture, we have beautiful rugged beaches, like you say, and everybody's really friendly. There was a recent, I think it was a poll last week about the most popular accent, which apparently is the northeast accent, the Geordie accent. So yeah,
it's a great accent, and you're right, it is a part of the country that just has so much to offer. And there's lots of bits of it that are like this. I have a particular soft spot for Northumberland because we used to go there on holiday when we were little, but when I was little. But I think there are parts of the UK, and it's even such a small country, and it must be true 10 times as much in lots of other countries, where you go to them sometimes and you kind of forget that this country has those kind of spectacular landscapes. And I remember I took somebody to the Lake District once for the first time, and they were like, "This is like New Zealand." And yeah, it's just a few hundred miles up the M6. And I think
we have definitely the Roman Wall.
Yeah, and those amazing forts and the castles. It's lovely.
Angel of the North. We have amazing things. I was very delighted to be an ambassador for the Olympics in Newcastle in 2012. We had we were a satellite venue, St James's Park, where our beloved Newcastle United play, and there was football happening. So I was an ambassador, and I used to meet and greet people and talk to them about the city and what are the delights could hold, and check their tickets and send them in. I would have taken them on a walking tour if I could. I just love meeting people. And I was actually, there's a beautiful place called Alnwick Gardens. I don't know if you've ever been there. I was a volunteer there for a while as well, which I absolutely loved. There's some great places. We could just talk about the northeast all the time, Robbie.
We could. It's tempting, but let's not. There's so much, because there's so many parts of your journey and story that I'm really looking forward to hearing about. Maybe, though, as is the case in almost all of these podcast episodes, we should start from, I'm sure we'll go back further than this into your story as well, because there's so much that connects together. But when did you first come across coaching in the way that you and I would talk about it now?
So I moved back to the northeast. I had a first career as a nurse. I'll start with that. So let's go back before then. I've always been an incredibly curious person who asked lots of questions, and I was always the sort of person who people would ask if I could help them. I think I was a natural teacher without realizing it. I would help people learn, which really is the essence of coaching, isn't it? Asking questions. So I I did my nurse training in the old apprentice model and absolutely loved being a student nurse. And I did burns nursing when I qualified for a couple of years in Newcastle, and then I went to Saudi Arabia for a year. And that was really interesting. And I also learned to scuba dive, which was a lifelong ambition. So that was brilliant. And then I went to London for 6 months to study a course in HIV and AIDS. And I was there for 6 years. And I guess I'll come back to that. But I then moved back to the Northeast. And I was just starting a new job as the staff development officer at Marie Curie Centre at the hospice in Newcastle. And my mum she was very ill. She had brain hemorrhages, and she wasn't able to live in a house anymore. She had a right-sided weakness and an electric wheelchair. So she came to live with my husband and I, and she came home for 6 months and with a care package. And I just came back from a day at work at Marie Curie and realised that I was working at work, then coming home, listening to the carers, looking after her, and I just felt like there was too many plates spinning. And I picked up a magazine, I think it was a She magazine, and there was an article in about life coaching. And I read this article, and it was, you know, those light bulb moments. And I thought, ooh, I think this is what I need. So I contacted the gentleman who'd written the article, and he put me in touch. There were a few different places I could contact. So my first coach was a wonderful lady called Gilly Shaw, who I had coaching with, and she helped me sort my life out. And then she said to me, I do not think this would be something that you were doing a lot of this already in your job. So I thought about it, and then I was busy studying courses in teaching adults, certificate in education and certificate in training practice. And then Marie Curie had an organisational restructure after 5 years working there, and they were making my job redundant, and they wanted me to be a regional training manager, travelling around Liverpool, Bradford, and Newcastle, and looking after providing training for the community nurses. And I thought I'd rather watch paint dry than travel around and buy other people in to do what I love doing. So at the same time, people found out I was being made redundant, and I guess I was headhunted to work in several organisations. I'd already thought about coaching, and I'd done an old online course. I say online because it wasn't like online now would be with Zoom, etc. On life coaching. And I'd been having coaching myself I changed coach. I had about 3 coaches before I met Marianne. So I experienced coaching for myself, and that's what made me think about, I want to be a coach. And then I started reading about it. And then I realized, actually, I'd been using a coaching approach for years. I'd been using a coaching approach when I was a student nurse. I'd been using a coaching approach when I was a staff nurse, when I was a charge nurse. And yeah, so.
And where, there's so many things I could ask about in there, but where do you think that coaching approach that you've been using all those years already came from? Or like, had it just evolved, or do you think there was some influences on it, or where did you think it came from?
I think I was really interested in people and how they did things, and rather than telling people what to do, I like to find out how they might do it. So I think I probably learned quite early on to ask questions. Maybe it was my granny's influence. I don't know, she wanted to be a nurse and couldn't be a nurse. She had to be a secretary because she couldn't go off and train to be a nurse. And I know that when I went to London, I went to London for 6 months to study a course in HIV and AIDS. It was at the time when the AIDS pandemic in the early, so 1988, when there were the iceberg adverts. Do you remember those? The icebergs and the tombstone adverts about AIDS for the government, horrible adverts they were. They terrified everybody, and it's never a good way to learn by scaring people, is it? Anyway, I went for 6 months and I got very involved in HIV work, and volunteering in some of the HIV projects. And I moved to an organisation called London Lighthouse, which is an AIDS hospice. And I was the equivalent of a ward sister there. And working alongside people my age that were dying, it just made you really think about life. And we celebrated life and death really openly. So what was different about HIV work compared to other work that I'd done was, when I was training as a nurse, you used to get into trouble if you talked to patients about death. Relatives people wouldn't want their relatives to know that they had cancer and they were dying, for example. Whereas that's very much changed over the years. And I think HIV work had a lot to do with that, because there became an honesty in talking about your condition and finding out about it, which probably was in parallel with the internet and resources and finding out more about health. And the dynamics of relationships changed as well within healthcare, I think. So patients became more empowered and had the right to ask questions. That was probably because of the client group with HIV, younger people who were more knowledgeable and wanted to know and have more control over their illness. But I think it made me realise what I really wanted to do with life. So being alongside people that are dying, and having amazingly honest conversations and just being with people, it made me think about, well, what do I really want to do? And I thought, I want to help people really enjoy their life. Mm-hmm. You know, I listened to a lot of people talk about what they wish they'd done. And it just made me think, I'm going to help people enjoy whatever it is that they want to do. So I'd always help people with jobs, interviews, or career direction, and so I guess I sort of dovetailed all that together and thought, well, what could I do? And a job came up in the training department at London Lighthouse. So I thought, oh, that might be interesting. I never planned it. I've never planned any of my career at all. It's emerged. So I moved into the learning and development department and was running HIV awareness courses and organising visits and things and doing quite a lot of public speaking. And I really enjoyed it. So I moved from nursing into, it wasn't called coaching, it was more staff development, but I was using a coaching approach. I learned that when I did my postgraduate certificate in coaching many years later. So, yeah.
And
so
part of that might even just be because coaching wasn't, given the timing of this, it wasn't really a thing, it's kind of been defined or developed or kind of captured as a particular set of skills or techniques since then in some ways, hasn't it? And I guess one of the things I've noticed from this podcast has been there is a group of people who, over the first, I don't know, between 1990 and 2005 or whatever, came to coaching, and often they had a story a bit like yours, which is they were kind of already, one way or another, they'd been working those skills, and then they found this thing which it turned out would use those skills in a new way or in a more concentrated way. I want to rewind a little bit, Fiona, just because that work with London Lighthouse and HIV, this and what you just said about sitting with those people of your age, who were in that place with that illness, which at the time, it's really interesting. I have somebody reasonably close to me in my family with HIV, and when he was diagnosed in, let's say, turn of the millennium, it felt like a death sentence. And actually he's still around because the treatment has advanced so much. But when we're talking about this in the late 80s, early 90s, that was certainly not the case, where it certainly felt like, again, you can tell me if that's wrong, but it was like the treatment just wasn't really there, was it? So
we didn't know. We didn't know. And they were very experimental, the treatments, and it was brutal. I mean, I would come on duty when I worked at Westminster Hospital before London Lighthouse, and it wasn't uncommon to come on duty to have handover and there to be 3 or 4 mainly young men who were dying, and then you'd say, someone would, the nurse in charge would say, and Frank's parents are coming down to see him. They haven't seen him for 10 years since they threw him out because he was gay. So then you had to welcome Frank's parents, who hadn't seen Frank for 10 years. Now, Frank wasn't the same boy, the same man that he was when he left home. He probably lost all his weight, looked terrible, had one of the terrible illnesses. And it was heartbreaking, really. There was a program on television recently on Channel 4 called It's a Sin, which really was a very accurate how that time was. So yeah, it was tough, actually. I learned so much. I went into it because I had two of my best friends at home were gay, and when I heard the prejudice that people in the health service were talking about, everybody was really scared, and I didn't know what to say. So I thought, I need to find out more about this. And one of the things that I learned quite early on was, I had a lot of wasted arguments with people because people's prejudice. And what you need to do is listen and clarify, and then just gently help them understand what the facts are, which might be the same as now, actually, with people who don't believe about coronavirus.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're probably right, and I think that in a way you've actually just given I read a book last year about kind of how do you talk to people with whom you really disagree. And they said, if one of the things you want to do is change people's minds, the first thing you do is you really listen to them and you clarify, and only then, once you've done that, do you start to introduce these bits of information. So it sounds like you learned that, like, not the easy way, but you learned it.
When I used to come back home, people used to, and there was this nightclub that that lots of people used to go to, and I would pop in to say hello to people I hadn't seen for ages. What are you doing? And I'd tell them, and they'd say, oh, what are you doing that for? And I was like, because I really enjoy it. But it was different to any of the, obviously to them. And so I spent a lot of my time talking about it and educating people. So naturally, when I moved into education, it seemed to be, the thing to do.
Yeah.
And I found my niche. I absolutely loved it. I love facilitating, training, coaching. I actually also trained as a clinical supervisor with healthcare professionals, and supervision. I've been involved in supervision for the last 35 years, supervising nurses and providing supervision for all sorts of people working in healthcare. And also I'm a coaching supervisor. So I have my own supervision. I've had it for 36 years. And I think it's absolutely essential to any of the work that anyone in a caring environment does, that we have proper supervision.
Yeah, and I agree. But I think it's really useful to hear you talk about why you think that's so important.
Because we all have blind spots, because we're human beings, and the work that we do is about connecting with other human beings. And I think it's good to have someone asking you questions about things, and it's good to be able to talk in a safe space. Yeah. So I think, I think it's essential. And it's never mandatory. In nursing, it's never been mandatory, and there's the problem.
Yeah.
In certain professions, it is. It's mandatory in social work. It's mandatory in counselling, I believe.
Yeah, I think so.
And in midwifery, but it's never been mandatory in nursing. So it's always icing on the cake. A bit like coaching's icing on the cake in organisations. And it's not mandatory that coaches have supervision. So, a lot of people are practicing without, and not something I would recommend.
No, it's just there's too many, even after many years, there's too many times when it's incredibly valuable that I would never want to stop, really. Too many, and again, I think it's also, maybe someone like you who obviously loves learning, you sent me an amazing list of some of the training you've done over the years, and it's like, there's so much in there, right? You obviously love learning, and that curiosity comes through, and I'm the same. Certainly if you've got that desire to learn, supervision is an amazingly rich way to learn about the craft. At least I know this from coaching. I imagine it's the same with nursing, but it's like to learn about the craft that you're doing and to learn about yourself so that you can do that craft.
There's an inspirational speaker that I really have been very inspired by, called Benjamin Zander. He's the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. And I went to a leadership session while I was working at Marie Curie. It was a film called Conducting Business, where he talked about really connecting with why are we doing what we do. And if someone's not enjoying what they're doing, trying to connect them with, and I do a lot of that in the work that I do. If people are a bit burnt out or they're fed up with what they're doing, it's to remind them of why they went into what they're doing. And he says, and if you're not enjoying it, get another job.
Yeah. So, yeah. And just for any listener who hasn't come across Ben Zander, I fully, endorse what you just said, to check him out, to check out the Art of Possibility, the book as well, which had such a massive effect on me.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm going to make you very jealous here. There's a picture back there. You probably can't. There's a picture back there.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like So OK magazine. Now, my 50th birthday, which was 2012, my friend sent me an email and said, look who's coming to Newcastle. And it was Benjamin Zander.
No.
He was coming to Newcastle. Seriously, he was coming to Newcastle for 5 days. And he was running work. He'd been working somewhere, doing a conducting something in Europe. And he'd then come to Newcastle. And he was at the university and he was facilitating workshops for musicians, and anybody could go. I practically stalked him, honestly. I contacted all the people I knew that had been on my courses that I'd shared the video with. He, when you meet somebody that you're really inspired by, he was even better than you could have possibly expected. He was amazing. He really was. He gets people to connect with what they're doing, that they're enjoying what they're doing, and he brought people to the front to play their instruments in front of an audience, and got them to think about what is it about the music that the writer wrote about this music, and really connect. Oh, he was amazing. And he thanked me for my contribution, which moved me.
Yeah.
Because I've been to quite a few of his sessions. That card there is my friend, one of my best friends, made me a card. She took a picture that I had of the two of us, and she put it as like an OK magazine. Yeah. And then inside she put, Benjamin Zander tries to escape from crazed Geordie woman. Stalker. But it was, honestly, it was fabulous. And there's a TED talk. His TED talk is amazing if people want to find out about him, where he aims to get everybody to enjoy classical music, and it's about 18 minutes of pure magic.
So good, isn't it?
Yeah.
And are you musical, Fiona? Do you have that as well to get from Ben's workshops?
I burst into song all the time when I'm training or coaching, and not necessarily coaching, but when I'm part of different groups. I love music. I've been part of a choir. My mum was very musical. She was a music teacher. I played the recorder, probably like everybody listening to this podcast, when I was at school. My son's very musical. He's a musician, and he's 17. And I've loved watching his development over the years. So, yeah, I am musical, actually. We're all musical.
It sounds like you are, and it sounds like you've connected with that in lots of ways. And I love the idea of bursting into song.
Yes.
That happens in the workshops. Can't be enough. Yes. That's it's quite one of the Art of Possibility stories that I tell most often to clients is the rule number 6 story.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It sounds, maybe I will spoil it now for listeners, but it's like the punchline of rule number 6. You can watch Ben Zander telling the story if you put rule number 6 into YouTube. But the punchline is, don't take yourself so goddamn seriously. And it sounds like you live rule number 6 in your workshops.
Oh, I do. In fact, when I watched him, when I went to Marie Curie, London Lighthouse was this amazingly flamboyant place. He could be open. People took their dogs to work. It was just colourful. There were people from all over the world who worked there. It was amazing. And then I came to the Northeast, which I loved, and I worked at Marie Curie, which was a bit twin set and pearls. And it was so different. And I felt I had to really had to be a different me. So I'd been able to be who I was, and then I had to fit within a role of professional staff development officer. And I felt really constrained. And then about a year into the role, I guess I was a bit like a peony rose unfurling. And about a year into the role, I watched Benjamin Zander, and then I kicked the door down and I was able to be me again. that was brilliant. And I came back, and I was the centre manager bought the film that we'd watched because I went on about it so much, and we used it at every available opportunity to help people understand and, you know, be able to be free, really. So rule number 6 was really important to me.
Yeah, amazing. Again, Fiona, there's so many places we could go, but I just want to rewind us a little bit, because you talked about why you ended up doing the work at London Lighthouse and some of the impact that had on you. And it's very striking, you know, that idea, especially like I reflected or mentioned already, of sitting with people. I mean, the story about the man's parents who haven't seen him for a long time and how changed he is, and all those kind of stories. You mentioned that, you know, you spoke to people a lot about their lives in that time.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, you know, were there patterns that emerged in those conversations about people's lives and how they thought about that at the end of it? You know, were the things that you remember that came out again and again, or particular examples that were really stark for you?
I think being able to be present with somebody, which really equipped me for being a coach, I think, being able to be alongside somebody as they were dying. Now, that might have taken days and weeks sometimes, but being able to talk about, let them talk, and they talk about their lives, they talk about their careers, the things they wish they could do. And I remember there was a ballet dancer. He was one of the first patients I looked after. And he said he felt like he was standing in the wings, waiting to go on for the biggest solo performance of his life. And he didn't know what it would be like, but he knew he'd have a good curtain call. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think not being afraid, I think death and dying, I think what HIV and AIDS provided was 2 of the biggest taboos: sexuality and death and dying. We have, during the last 18 months, we've had a lot of talk about death and dying because of the COVID pandemic. And again, it's, you know, it's not something that we tend to talk about, is it? So I think it gave me the gift of being able to be present and to be able to talk about it. So I'm the sort of person who gets asked to write a eulogy. When I was at London Lighthouse, we had what we called an after-death care. So we had our own mortuary and viewing room, and the nurses looked after that. So people would come and see their loved ones. I led several funeral services, carried coffins, wrote eulogies. You know, amazing. And the funerals were the sort of funerals where I remember the one that I remember most vividly was, it was an ordinary coffin, but it had chicken wire on it. And everybody was given a rose or a daffodil or a brightly coloured flower. And everybody went and touched the coffin and put the flower in, so that after the service, the coffin went up and it was just this mass of flowers. And that was all about that person's life. They'd planned that. So I think being able to talk about something which seems the most difficult to talk about, which, you know, is probably planning your own death, planning your own funeral service. Now, the reason why I'm so comfortable with it is I did an amazing course run by the Terence Higgins Trust. And I remember it vividly because before I went on the course, when people used to ask if they could talk to me about planning their funerals, I used to get this golf ball in my throat, and I'd make a nursing excuse, like I was too busy, and I'd come back and hope that they would change the subject. And then I went on this amazing course, and there was one weekend all about death and dying. And then after that, I was able to just be, because I on that workshop, we did a whole load of exercises around thinking about your own death and writing your own eulogy and lying down while somebody read it. And it was amazing, really.
Wow.
So I then went back into work on the Tuesday, and I sat with Franz, he was called, and he wanted Pink Floyd and Lilies, and I was able to be there and be there rather than doing something. And I think as coaches, the biggest thing we offer our clients is a space and our ears and our heart.
Yeah. And I think also, I mean, it's kind of almost a bit trite of a thing to say, but it feels true. It's like you've also just kind of, there's another lesson about coaching, I think, in that story you've just told, which is why we have to do the work on ourselves, whether that's supervision or something else. Because what an amazing story. And it sounds like it happened so quickly that it like the causality is clear, that it was doing that work on that weekend of the Terence Higgins course that enabled you then to be there.
Definitely.
With that person. And I think that it is, it's like, it is, those questions are worth asking ourselves, all those questions. But I mean, have you ever, that workshop, right? The eulogy I've done with clients before, I've done for myself, lie down while someone reads it to you. Have you repeated that in workshops since? I'm going to be trying to come up with a...
No, I haven't done that. I haven't done that myself. No, but it was an amazing time, really. I think as well, at the time, people who worked in the HIV units were very close because there was a lot of prejudice. And because sometimes the work was so, a bit like in coaching, when you're working with a client and it might be really tough stuff, and you have the session, and then they go on, or they switch, or you switch off the Zoom.
Yeah.
That's probably more at the moment. And you might have done some amazing work. And then who do you talk? You can't talk about it, can you? Because of confidentiality. So that's why it's great to reflect. And then you can take that to supervision.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we could go so many places from here. But maybe let's come back to coaching. It's kind of reappeared in our conversation. And so you found Jilly via the article, and then you worked with some other coaches, and you said you did like an old online course, not a Zoom filled one. Who was that with?
That was with Newcastle College, and it was there was a whole array of courses. In fact, Marianne Craig has on her website, she has a regularly updated resource, which is where you can find out about courses.
Yeah.
And so there are lots of colleges like Newcastle College in the sort of college network, further education colleges, where you could learn the skills of life coaching, and you didn't actually have to do any. It was theoretical. And I think one of the things that I would always encourage people to do if they're thinking of being a coach is have some coaching yourself, because there's experiential learning. So the adult learning cycle is the model I use for all my work. Kolb's learning cycle. So with the way we learn best as adults is we tend to dip into reflection because it's so busy. And what coaching enables us to do, and supervision, is to deepen that reflection and conclude and understand why, see it through different lenses. And then the most important bit is how are you going to transfer that learning back into the next experience? And when you have a coach, we make people accountable, don't we? And that's why it works so well.
Yeah, completely agree. And then when was it that you started? Obviously, I think you said that Jilly had even given you that little shot of, maybe you should do this, Fiona. When was it that coaching and also join up the dots a little, because you said you moved into training and development at Marie Curie or at Lighthouse, and then Lighthouse.
I moved into learning and development at Lighthouse. then I met my husband on a Greek island, a holiday called Skiros, which was one of the first holistic holidays.
Wow.
So I met him there. He was from England. I met him there, and we got engaged, and then decided that we would move up to the northeast. He was from Chesterfield, and we saved up, and we went travelling for 7 months. I was actually, if I think back, I wouldn't say burnt out, but I'd been around death and dying for about 9 years in HIV and AIDS, and probably it was good to have a break. And I did a lot of thinking, mainly visiting friends in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Thailand, who I'd worked with, who'd gone back to work back home, or they'd emigrated. So it was lovely to visit places where I used to write letters to. Do you remember the olden days when we used to write letters?
I do remember it well.
Yeah, so it was nice to visit these addresses. And then came back to the northeast and started working at Marie Curie. But I was already doing training. Facilitation, I think, is the thing that whether it's a person, which we do in coaching, or facilitating a group, I really enjoy that. I love helping people learn. I love that light bulb moment.
Yeah, and then so when did it come? Because you work for yourself now.
Yes.
When and how did that happen?
Well, I enjoyed teaching and facilitation. When I was at Lighthouse, I moved into the training department, and the way that they facilitated any training was very experiential, and I learned how to do it. And I thought, oh, I like this. So it was getting people to do exercises and asking them questions and getting and flip charts, and it was very low tech, but really meaningful.
Yeah. And so then now you work for yourself. That's what you do. At some point that happened. So just to join the dots, how did you come to be Fiona Setch, the coach, the trainer outside of organization?
Okay, yes. So working at Marie Curie. So I moved to the northeast, and I got the job. My husband's a vet, so he got a job as well. And our plan was to see if we liked Newcastle. But if we didn't, we might try Brighton or Edinburgh, or we weren't sure. And then so we were staying at my mum's, who had been looking after our cats, 3 cats, while we were away travelling. And sadly, my mum was unwell and had brain hemorrhages. She was 59, and she was very ill in hospital, and they thought she would die. She had a right-sided weakness, and they were talking to my brother and I about explaining the situation, and they said, "Have you got any questions?" And I said, "Yes. Could you refer her to Hunters Moor Rehabilitation Centre, please?" And they all looked at each other. The nurses and doctor looked at each other, and somebody said to me, "Did you not hear what we said?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what. If she dies, cancel the referral. But I think it's really important that you refer her, because she might live." Now, she lived for 23 years. So she went for rehabilitation, and then we found a house and she lived with us, because she couldn't live in the house she was living in. She had an electric wheelchair, a chariot as she called it. Mm-hmm. And she came home for they thought 6 months, because she was pretty poorly. And she was a very tenacious, amazing lady. And she lived with us for 11 years. So my work, when I started work at Marie Curie, I was working full-time, but I was also helping her, facilitating her hospital appointments and work. And then after about, so I was really enjoying my work at Marie Curie. It was some national work, because their head office is in London. They've got hospices all around the country. So I was doing coaching and training and supervision for the porters, the cleaners, the consultants, fundraisers and nurses. It was great. I loved it. And then they decided to have an organisational restructure, and they made my job redundant. So as I said before, I didn't want the job that and people headhunted me. Someone had heard about the work I was doing, and the Deanery of Medicine asked me if I'd do some work. I had a bit of a reputation for helping doctors that were struggling a bit during their training to be consultants, to help. I had a bit of a reputation to help them to think about how they were working, and so I started doing some work with some coaching with doctors as they were training in their specialities. I didn't plan it, it just evolved.
Yeah, and it's the second time, Fiona, that you kind of referenced that you didn't plan this business, it's just evolved.
Yes.
And I think there's something to be really said for that as a way of running, perhaps any business, but certainly a business like the one that you run. And I just wonder what it's been like over the years to run a business in that way that just evolves, and what your reflections on that are.
Well, I've really enjoyed it. For some people, it wouldn't be their way. I am a very fly by the seat of your pants type of girl. I'm very focused when I need to be, but I get my energy from ideas and inspiration and possibilities, which, if I'm working with somebody who likes to be organised and structured, we really complement each other well. And I've got a couple of, I do associate work with a couple of people who are like that. But I think it works for me, and it works for my clients. Where it didn't work was, for the last 11 years, I've been working at a hospice in the North East Coast, in Oswald's Hospice. And I work there the equivalent of 1 day a week doing coaching and some team facilitation with the clinical staff. So when the pandemic hit last year, all my work evaporated, and I understand why, because I work with healthcare, because I work for myself. I wasn't really on anybody's radar. So, if I'd actually been working in a department, then I would have been one of the staff that was, furloughed or sent home or whatever. But actually, at the time, it was really helpful because my mum had, she left our house after 11 years and went into sheltered housing, became independent, which was great. And then she developed dementia, and she went into a nursing home. And so she'd been in the nursing home 5 years. And sadly, she was one of the people who died in the nursing home. So the first part of the pandemic for me was 7 weeks of walking to our nursing home twice a day, watching her through the window. So that was really tough. And so in a way, my work evaporating gave me the space to be able to do that, and to be able to spend some time grieving. And but that was really tough.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. And that story, and especially because it sounds like your mum's been such a big part of your story and your life.
And the irony is that I wanted to be, I looked after people. I was very good at looking after people when they died, and I always thought I would be able to do that for my mum, and I wasn't able to. One of my friends, Kath Mannix, who wrote an amazing book about death and dying, she was a palliative care consultant. She said to me, "Do you remember all the patients that you looked after whose loved ones couldn't be there? Well, you were paying it forward, and it was time for you to collect." And that was a really nice way to think of it. So my work, but I haven't said that, my work's come back, which is great. Supervision's never been more important, and I've had some counselling as well. I've been working with a soul midwife, because I think I was suffering from a bit of post-traumatic stress from going around to the home and watching through the window. It's like something out of a science fiction novel, isn't it?
Yeah, and one of the tragic things is we know that yours is not the only story like that, right? Yeah. That there are others over the past 18 months, especially in that first period, I think. And I guess I want to catch that it's a, you kind of said there was a really interesting thing you said, which was, how has, I can't remember what you said about your business now, but how it's just, you haven't had the plan, it's just kind of evolved and happened. And then I think you were kind of saying the one time it didn't work was the start of coronavirus, except I think we can kind of hear, and also the way you told that story, that it actually did, right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
not that you would ever like wish your work to all evaporate, but there it is, and that was a time that maybe you needed that.
I think I've just spent 4 months doing some interim work, organisational development work in a local trust, and I was facilitating a Teams session on Teams with some senior nurses in a critical care unit, and one of the senior nurses had to shield, and she was very reluctant to participate in the session. And at one point she looked at the camera and she said, I felt cancelled because she was asked to shield and she wasn't able to look after the unit like she was. And when she said that, it resonated for me. That's how I felt. So surely I took that to my next supervision session, but it was really powerful because, and that often happens with clients, doesn't it? They will sometimes say things which really take your breath away, don't they? Yeah, it's been great work. I really enjoyed working, doing the work in the NHS that I was doing. And I love my work at the hospices. I've done a lot of work since I've been working for myself in the hospices in the Northeast and a couple down south as well, a couple of children's hospices. Because of my palliative care background, I've introduced supervision and done some presentation skills training and leadership training, which I really enjoyed. Very creative training. I love creating.
Yeah, and maybe actually just so that people who are listening can get a sense of it. Obviously, the last year and a half have been kind of strange, but before that, in terms of your work, how did it evolve? Like, yeah, I mean, I know that there are lots of organizations you've worked with. We've kind of hinted at the different strands that you have to your work, but maybe now, but also maybe if it's more kind of normal 18 months ago, how did your work evolve to look at that point, and what are the strands that make it up, and how do you talk about what you do when someone asks?
So I would do consultancy work. So Stanner Stairlifts was one of my clients, for example. Somebody's husband worked there and had watched his wife on courses I'd run at Marie Curie. So I ended up going there and finding out what the frontline managers, or FLEMs as they were called, abbreviated, and they needed some leadership development. So I listened. I walked around a couple of shifts, found out what they wanted, and then developed some workshops around Kolb's learning cycle. And the last part was personal action planning. And then I would do a coaching session based on their action plan in the workplace. Mm-hmm. So, and then it would so if they were wanting to look at time management or assertiveness, then they would identify something, and then I would put those ideas together and develop another workshop. So it was very organic, really.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like you were, I mean, like you said before, right, bringing the coaching approach everywhere you went.
Yes, sprinkling coaching everywhere. I'm the coaching wizard.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's so many places we could go down, but maybe let's just go straight to coaching, actually, because that's like, what's your coaching practice like now, and how has it evolved?
Right. So my coaching practice is an eclectic mix of, which you won't be surprised to hear, will you? So it includes some organizational work mainly with healthcare professionals. So that would involve mainly nurses or doctors, and the coaching would be around an aspect of their work. And then I do some career coaching and interview coaching. So I have an ebook called The Art of Interview Skills, which is published on Bookboon, which I enjoyed, which I'm going to write. I'm going to write an ebook is but you know what I mean. I'm going to write a book about interview skills. I love interview skills.
Yeah, and you said it's been downloaded like 280,000 times or something on one of the things I read about you, something like that. So I don't know Bookboon actually. So tell me about that, and like how did you end up writing it?
Somebody contacted me and said that I wrote some articles for the Hospital Doctor newspaper, and somebody had Googled interview skills and my name had come up. So they contacted me and asked me if I'd like to write a book for them. And Bookboon, they're a Danish company who have offices in several countries. They've got one in London. And they asked me if I would like to write a book on interview skills. So I wrote an online book. It's been downloaded like 325,000 times.
Wow.
I wish I had £1 for every download. You'd have to, not the way that it works in their model. But what it did was it gave me a deadline, and I also thought my clients, I can say download that because they can download it for free. You can pay for it, or you can download it for free with adverts in. So yeah, I trained as a fireworks coach. And so I use the fireworks approach for career coaching. But I would say I work with people at every stage during their career. So I have some clients who are not sure about if the university course is right for them or not, or they're leaving university, going for their first job. I sometimes do some personality profiling using Myers-Briggs with them to help them understand themselves and to think about what are the sort of careers they might like to have, or encourage them to go fishing, which is one of the tools that you have in career coaching. So, if you go fishing and you have one rod, you only get one fish. If you go out with a big net and you cast it and you pull it in, you might get a couple of fish and a boot and a bit of seaweed and a few shells. And in there might be something that's really valuable. So that's what I encourage people to do. Go fishing and gather as many ideas as you can about the sort of work you might like to do, and then let's see which one you might like to pursue. So there's that early stage of your career, and then when someone's in a job, providing them with some support in their new job. Then there's if someone's changing their job or going for promotion, and then there might be some skills coaching around that. Or if they're having any difficulties, often leaders have difficulty in managing people. So I'm sure everybody who's listening that'll resonate with. And then there's going on maternity leave. So I'll do maternity coaching, helping somebody prepare to go on maternity leave, then coming back from maternity leave, then the confidence boost that sometimes women need when they're coming back from maternity leave.
Yeah, and well, for obvious reasons, you might even be able to hear that reason in this episode, because my daughter's somewhere around the flat and she's not that old. I've been really with my wife. It's an incredible transition to go through for anyone to become a parent, but particularly for women because of those things, those stages that you've just described. And maternity coaching, I know it's one of the big menu bits on your website, one of the buttons that people would see if they land there. And I guess, and it was actually a question, so we have the Coaches Journey community is a group of coaches who I do some work with, and they also support the podcast. And one of them sent in when I told them all that I was speaking to you, wanted to ask about that, really, that maternity coaching, kind of how did you start doing it? How did it become a thing that you talk about? And on the website, I really liked, and it resonates from my wife's experience, but also from clients I've had, those kind of particularly 3 stages that happen when you're in that transition. How did that evolve, and how do you work with a client who comes to you in that way? That's a lot of questions there, Fiona.
Right, okay.
So answer whatever feels right.
So, and actually, I should say for paternity coaching as well, because, I think it's something which new dads. Well, the thing that, when my journey to having my lovely boy, Jamie, wasn't an easy one. It took 6 years. I had 2 miscarriages. I never thought I was going to be a mum. And we were just saving up for IVF because I was too old to have it in the National Health Service. I was 42 when I had Jamie. And I remember I was was running I was running a supervision course with a group of people over 6 months, and I didn't see them for a few months, and obviously I got larger. I was like a space hopper in the end. I had a huge bump. And what I noticed was people's questions or comments got more and more negative, as in I would sort of have closing. So the way I would close the course would be something you're looking forward to. And then I would, if somebody said, "Oh, I'm looking forward to that," I might say, "Oh, that's interesting." And somebody would say, "Oh, you'll not be able to do that before long when you've got a baby." So there were, and I think people were trying to be kind, and I just thought, well, there's a lot of negative language, and I'd heard that with a few people, so I made a few notes. I always go everywhere with a little notebook to write ideas down, and I just thought, right, there's a phase before you go to maternity leave where there's organising your workspace, there's organising your work to hand it over, and also things like getting your CV ready in case you decide to change your job or you don't go quite back. Capturing the things that you've done since you started the job, because often when women are going on maternity leave, they might have been in the organisation for a few years and not, their CV is different then to how it might be now. So capturing those thoughts, and also to think about when you're on maternity leave, there are great skills that you learn. So capturing those as well. So that was the first phase. Then there's the being off and thinking about coming back to work. So, organisations have touch base days, don't they? So there was that bit, to be able to have someone to talk to about that, the concerns you might have. And then there's the actual being at work and coping with it and the confidence. And so I think one of the things I'm really great at as a coach is helping people with their confidence. So
yeah, I'm interrupting your answer to one question with another question, but that really jumped out at me. I know what we choose to go on our websites is what we choose to go on, right? But the first two quotes that I read on your website were both like Fiona has helped me massively with my confidence. I think it was like, since I began coaching with Fiona, my confidence has rocketed, was one thing, and the other one was working with Fiona has resulted in my confidence improving 100%. And it's like, those are not small things for people to say, right? And you've just said it again there, and I can imagine that, yes, certainly for women in that period of transition when your identity is changing so much, that confidence is a difficult thing to hold on to. But what do you think it is that you're doing with people that makes that difference with the confidence?
Well, I think one of the things is pausing and thinking about confidence. So I'll often say to people, there's no such thing as, but just imagine there is a confidenceometer. Yeah. So I'll draw 0 to 10. It's a visual analog. We use it in healthcare all the time. So I'm just drawing it now. So 0 to 10.
Yeah, like a scale. Yeah, and I like it. You've got the smiley face.
So where do you think you are now with your confidence?
Yeah.
Somebody might. Yes. So imagine that you're going back to work and you're not feeling very confident. Where would you be?
Right. So let's say they say 5.
A 5. Okay. And where would you like to be?
Oh, well, does everyone say 10, or some people just say kind of?
That's why you ask them.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, I can imagine 7, 8 is what most
7
people,
or an 8. Okay.
Say, yeah.
So my job as a coach is to get you from there to there.
Yeah.
Or our job is to work together. Now, the reason why you always ask somebody is, some people go, I want to be a 10. And some people go, actually 6 is enough. Yeah. And when you don't know your client very well, that gives you a real insight into where they are. And some people go, 10, I'm going to be a 20, everybody's different, aren't they? So I think visual tools like that work really well.
And then is it about, because I know sometimes when I use tools like that, it's about, in some ways what you're doing by naming the 7 or whatever it was that I said then, is you're really, do you then get people to understand what 7 would look like and how it is? So that, because part of it, I think one of the strange things about confidence is it's like one of the things I can imagine that if I was your client and I got that exercise is that confidence is so like slippery.
Yeah.
as just a thing. Like, what do we even mean by it? You know, I got an old client of mine who's got a podcast about confidence, and it's like,
Yes.
they've interviewed a whole bunch of people on it now. It's called To Coach Confidence, if people want to look it up, and including
Oh,
me.
right.
And it's like each of the guests says something different about confidence, and it's like, it is a slippery thing, but it does tend to mean something for us. So I imagine, but tell me if this is right, that one of the things that you guiding someone through something like what you've just described is it just makes it less of a slippery beast and more of a real thing.
Yes, and I think also our own confidence relates to who we are and how we feel. And as a new mother, my confident self was very different to a friend who was a new mother, because we're different. And it's really easy to compare yourself to people, or to try and strive for perfectionism, which are both curses. You know, they're not good, they're not great to compare yourself, or to be what is perfect. So really, I think it's just helping people feel comfortable in themselves and congruent.
Yeah.
And also having goals that they can strive for, that are measurable. So, and then encouraging them to, when they get to 7, so the next time, getting them to keep a journal, you know, to keep a diary.
Yeah, I was going to say, so then how do you sorry, this is getting quite what would you call it, like detailed, but I'm really curious about this, and I think people who are listening will be really interested. I remember when I was just starting out coaching, having done some training. We had like one of the people I trained with, we were talking about like, what's confidence coaching and how do you help people when they come and they say they want to be more confident. And it sounds like obviously you've done that with people. So as time goes on, then you start from that place of having the visual aid, the in that case, the example we just played with, 5 to 8 or whatever it is. How do you then work with people over time to keep that in mind, or to help them see that they're progressing, those kind of things?
Well, that's a starting point where they are, and getting them to keep I always ask them if they like stationery, which yes, most people do. So go and buy yourself a book that's attractive to write in. And what I want you to do is download your ideas, your thoughts.
And how often do you recommend people do that? Or
as much as they want.
Yeah.
Because I think, using another metaphor, people are often a bit like a mouse on a wheel, going round and round and round and round with ideas, thoughts, negative thoughts. And actually what we do in coaching, I think, is we pause the wheel and we help them get off it. So I would go back to that, but also help people. When was a time that you were confident, and get them to look at people that they think are confident, or yeah. So there's a kind of whole process depending on what it is that they want to be, where they are, and what they want to be more confident about. But I mean, I've got a friend, Richard Nugent, who wrote a book about confidence, and he says, can you remember those toys, the Weebles? Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. They're like a...
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a bit like confidence. You can wobble, and it's okay to wobble, but you don't fall down because they've got a firm base. And we can all wobble about things, but our life experience, we have a sort of... We have, as human beings, unique skills and abilities, and it's just what we do as coaches is we shine a light on that, don't we? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really nice definition of confidence. You know, you wobble, but you don't fall down. I really like it. And I interrupted. I want to hold it because I think the maternity. I want to go back to the maternity stuff, because it's so interesting. Because just that confidence piece, I think, is really nice and practical. And do you think there's? Oh, sorry, you go.
With women as well. Now, so when I was a parent, when I had a new baby, I didn't have all the social media pressures. So. You know, now when you see someone who's just had a baby, airbrushed and looking gorgeous, you know, there's a lot of pressure. And I think so one of the things with confidence coaching is it's real. It's, you know, there's a lady called Gina Ford who wrote a book about parenting, who when she wrote it never had a child. So controlled crying, I believe, is what she said. And actually, babies will cry and they need cuddles, and we all have our own ways of that. There's no one way that's right. I don't think you control crying, but it's interesting. It's all interesting, isn't it? There's so many different things to learn. Is the way to think about it. But just actually, one of the things that I observed was that people within Myers-Briggs, two of the areas that Myers-Briggs looks at is where you get your energy from, which is extroversion or introversion preference, and how organised and planned you like to be, which is judging or perceiving. So if you're a person with a preference for judging, you like to be organised and planned and structured, and you don't like surprises. If you've got a preference for perceiving, you're quite comfortable with going with the flow. So with a new baby, which one do you think is going to be less stressful?
Yeah, well, I think like one of my best insight on parenting so far, and we're about 7.5 months in, is the times it has been really horrible is when I've really tried to control what's going on. And as soon as I surrender into the moment, and it's from big things and difficult things to silly things like trying to get her to sleep when there's like an England match about to kick off in like 30 minutes. That was like, she was never going to sleep because I was stressed out. And as soon as I could let go, then the whole thing shifted. But so I think that I can totally hear how one group of people would find that experience, which is so much it's just so much change in such a short space of time.
And the other thing is that people with a preference for introversion, who get their energy from within, usually take to maternity leave much better, because they're going to be at home with their baby, and happy with that. Whereas people with a preference for extroversion, who get their energy from people and being out and about, and especially if they were the people with a preference for extroversion who like to be organised and planned, they would be really at risk to postnatal depression.
Right. Yeah.
So that sort of thing's quite helpful in helping someone understand their personality, in which case just might be good to think about this, and so there are 3 phases in maternity coaching, and it's a bit like that with retirement coaching actually. So I offer people retirement coaching. So that's about thinking about, just starting to think the seeds of thinking about retirement, all the options there might be. So, are you wanting to retire and come back to your work? Are you wanting to retire and have time off and then volunteer? Or, there's all sorts, depending on all sorts of things. And then there's the bit when you are retired. And then there's the bit where you might think you want to do something else. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to have 3 or 4 careers now, is it?
Yeah. And so with those two, like as examples, maternity coaching and retirement coaching, it sounds like there's it's not quite a system, is it? But there's like a sequence that you've seen over time because of what you said about not planning and evolving. Was it just that you had several about to be mums or mums in maternity leave that came to you and you gradually worked with them, and the same with retirement? Or did you kind of realize that you wanted to support people through those transitions? How did that work come about?
I'm meeting people in the workplace. So some of the organisations I work at, so for example, St Oswald's, someone was coming up to retirement, and so I just designed this package for them, and they said, this has been really helpful. And I thought, oh right, perhaps I should, So one of the things I need to do is I need to have a new website where I can. Well, do I need a new? Yeah, I do really need a new website. I'm not great at that side of things, so that I can promote that side of work, because it's not something that I do a lot of. My work's always come word of mouth, so I'm very, so I've never really needed to to promote myself. But I feel like I should do more marketing.
Why?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe we should have a coaching session about it.
Maybe we should. No, well, I asked that for 2 reasons. I think that there is a good reason to want to do that. So I think that you obviously don't need to the story you're telling, you haven't said, I desperately need an extra 10 coaching clients or anything like that, right? You sound busy, albeit COVID had an effect on that. But I think that there is a good argument. So it's like, it's always for coaches, you don't need to have a website, or you don't need to have a particular website. I think that's always true. And there are plenty of people, and we've had guests on the podcast who don't have websites, or who just have a one page which says email me here and all that kind of thing. And there's a thing that can't happen. Like, it then depends, like, who do you get, who comes to you? And there is some selection that will happen if you don't really have a website. Whereas if you have a thing saying, here's some retirement coaching that I do, and this is what I've learned about doing it, then actually it enables some people to choose you who might not otherwise. And we don't really know whether that will be better or worse, but if we think about possibility, there's some more possibility there. And I think that's the thing that I always try and remember with marketing. It's like, or I had another guest who said something like, it's like, I'm not going to get it exactly, but it's like, are we doing what we need to so that people can, if they want to, am I doing something that gets in the way of people getting in touch with me? And you could look at that. And I think the maternity coaching page on your website is really nice. And having, been married to somebody who's in the middle of that now, I really think I can understand how if you were just about to have a baby or just had one and you landed on that page, you would think, oh, wow, I could really do with some of this help. And I guess hang on a minute, I think I've just got another one. There's another example of why having the website which says something about what you do on is good, which is that there might be some people who don't ever get coaching, who would get coaching with you if they'd read that page. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think organizations, if you think about how, when women go back to work and end up on, having to take time off, or they're not feeling confident and have a wobble, if organizations provided these sort of services, it would save a lot of people being off sick.
Yeah, and people leaving, and people, just disengaging from their jobs, all kinds of things.
Yes.
I never want to make it out that it is necessarily for an organization easy to manage the fact that they're losing one of their people for however many months. But I think that there's a lot of unskillful responses to that thing that happens. And so is that, I guess there's this part of your business that you're talking about a little bit here, which is the work at St. Oswald's, for example, but also it sounds like this is happening elsewhere, where you're doing some organizational work with an organization, but sometimes coaching is tied into that. And in this example, some of your work has evolved because there's someone here who's about to retire. You design them up, you make up a way of working with them. They say it's really useful. And it sounds like the kind of the opportunity in the organization to experiment is something that you've really taken advantage of. Yes.
So it's a lovely combination of pre-COVID. It was a lovely combination of going into work. Well, it still is actually going to work in organisations, mainly healthcare organisations. So I would be working from home, and also walking coaching. One of the things I've done during the pandemic actually is I was at a Coaching at Work, which is a coaching magazine. I was at a Coaching at Work conference in November, and they were talking about coaching through COVID, which was, I don't know if you've heard of it, Robbie.
Yeah, I have, but for people who haven't,
right? Yeah. So coaching through COVID emerged from a group of coaches who wanted to do something to help healthcare professionals when everything was really critical, and it stemmed from a coach who had been asked a question: where were the coaches when there was the financial crash a few years ago? Where were the coaches that could have helped ask questions? Or so they thought, right, let's do. This person said, let's do something. So they formed Coaching Through COVID, which is, and so I wasn't involved at then. I came on board about 6 months into the project, and so they ask coaches to apply, experienced coaches, to be able to offer pro bono coaching for healthcare professionals, for anyone who's working in the health service, and that's what they've been doing. So I've had several clients and I've done sort of 6 sessions. And what I was doing with one person was walking. So he was walking, he went for a walk. I didn't, I just sat here, but he went for a walk because he was stuck in an intensive care unit for 12 hours with a mask on. So yes, so just giving a space, and it's been amazing. And they have organised reflective sessions for the coaches and some amazing CPD. So I recently did a session around poetry. And I wrote a poem actually about some coaching I'd been doing in a critical care unit from that workshop actually, which has been lovely. And one of the things that's been amazing about the pandemic is there's been so many opportunities for CPD, isn't there?
Like lots happening.
Yes.
I guess when lots is happening, there's kind of, there's opportunity that
yes, there's been lots
as well as everything else.
Yes, there's been lots of opportunities. I mean, in the health service, there's been nothing for our doctors and nurses anymore because they've had no time for anything but working and looking after patients. So offering this has been, I think it's a great thing to be part of. And then I've been doing some work for a trust, doing coaching and coaching teams, and that's been, I've really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I mean it's almost like thinking about your background and the story that you've told in this conversation. There's a way in which it feels like you were being prepped. Like this time right now is a really important time for all the things that you've told us about, really, including death and palliative care, including the work you've done to train and support nurses and hospital and hospice staff, and all, we know the values for well-being and health of things like coaching.
There's never been a time like this in the NHS. Our healthcare professionals, today's July the 26th, 7th, our healthcare is on its knees. It really is.
Yeah.
It's really worrying because there's another wave coming and they're really struggling. So
for people who are listening, it's interesting. I don't know if the coaching through COVID is continuing, or if they're still looking for people who are listening who kind of hear that. And
yes,
it'll be later by the time people are listening. But is it still going, or what would you recommend that people could do to make a contribution? Because I think there are a lot of people who, I think in a way, healthcare professionals have never been in the public's consciousness and mind as much as this.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe the AIDS pandemic would have been a time, but I don't think so, because it's like it's so much everywhere that I doubt people have ever been there as much. And there will be a lot of people out there who want to make a contribution. And what would you recommend for those people who?
Well, you can come for coaches, but they want experienced coaches, because it's tough listening to what's happening. And if you don't, and also they don't want newly qualified coaches, because it's not about offering a model. It's about being present and letting people talk and giving them a space, really. That's in essence what it is. Sometimes people want to talk about their careers, but the essence of it is that. So if you contact coaching through, if you go onto the Coaching at Work website, and it's CTC, Coaching Through COVID, there may well still be, I think there probably will be, because this is going to be going on for quite a long time.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, we'll put links to that in the show notes and things. And I just think we don't know. Yeah, we don't know what the impact is going to be, and the healthcare professionals, it's like, no, of course the system and the people are on their knees, because it's been 18 months nonstop, and
yes,
nothing was prepared for this.
Well, people had to cancel holidays, days off, because shifts had to be covered, especially in critical care and intensive care. And they just did, because that's what they do.
Yeah, because their service, doctors.
But
and nurses,
the impact is the impact is. Would you like to hear my poem?
Yeah, of course. Is that what it's
So
about? It's about the impact?
it's, well, what it is, yes. So what it is I was doing some work in a critical care unit, and I was trying to encourage the senior nurses who used to meet regularly, face-to-face meetings, and they would do some learning together, or they'd look at problem solving. And all that's gone because they're just literally ships that pass in the night, because they're just managing day to day and changing shifts all the time. So, and I did some face-to-face sessions. We called it compassionate listening, or reflective spaces. But people said they were too busy. So I did some sessions.
And I mean, let's just catch it like that. That could be at any organization, really. Like I think you must have this as well. One of the conversations you often have about training, about development, about coaching is that I'm too busy for that thing.
Yes.
And we know, I guess it's our job in some ways to remind people that that's perhaps the time that they desperately need it most.
So this poem's about, it's called We're Busy, Too Busy, and it's about people saying that and explaining why, and then stopping, and then experiencing. So, which I think is the essence of what we're providing. We're busy, too busy to stop right now. Our patients need us. So just what and how can we stop to think beyond our clinical space? We breathe in through our masks, sweating, too hot on our face. We watch our patients fighting to live. We have no option but to give and give. On iPads, our patients are forced to say goodbye. No loving hand-holding, feels like a lie. Every ounce of our care has been spent at a cost. Days off and holidays promised to loved ones lost. So how can you ask us to stop? We're busy, too busy, but when we did, you captured our thoughts and lifted the lid. We looked into the screens at each other on Teams. Separated by this relentless virus, our inward scream, the space of being together stopped us in our tracks. Some space, some healing, we won't look back.
Thanks so much, Fiona, for reading that. It's the first poem on the Coach's Journey podcast, hopefully not the last. And I could feel about partway through, I noticed myself like really dropping into it. And I think there's something about poetry, isn't there? We've talked a little bit about music. It's like, I could have a go at answering this, but I'm curious what you would say. Why do you think a poem is like a powerful way for you to express those things that you just expressed?
Well, it was very present for me that I was coming to the end of this piece of work. And when I was saying to people I was leaving, people were saying, but we need you now. We're just starting to do this. And I thought I needed a way of capturing it. And I'm sending that to the place I was working. And I shared it with one of the nurses yesterday, who said, please send it to my manager because they need to hear this. I think it's just a different way of expressing it, isn't it? Yeah, and that was in the poetry workshop for coaching. So it was, yeah. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but I think I'm going to do more of it. I'm actually writing a book about my experiences in the pandemic. I've been interviewing some people to think about strategies that people have. A lot of people have changed the way they've been doing things. One of my best friends, who her chapter will be called Queen of Mince and Dumplings, because that's what she did to help people. She made mince and dumplings. And she used to be a city tour guide, and she danced every night. She was retired and she never would be in. And she had gone from that to just staying in the house. And she's now starting to go out again. But, it was such a difference in her life. And just talking about what things did she learn, and just I want to weave in some coaching tips as well. So I'm writing that at the moment. I'm part of a writing group. I've been part of a group called How to Be Brilliant, which is a Facebook group. Michael Heppel is an author from the Northeast who's written How to Be Brilliant, Flip It. He's amazing, and he started this group off, which I was part of from last February, and then COVID, the pandemic hit, and the group got really, and he's been a positive light. He's broadcast once a week throughout everything, and he's been doing some writing workshops, which have been brilliant. So I'm really enjoying that.
Yeah, you don't have to do this, but like I just want to catch the poem and what the nurse said. It's like there's a way in which you could write, I'm not sure you'd want to do this, but you could write a poem at the end of every workshop or every intervention that you did or every coaching client. And I'm not sure I'd want to say that I would do this, but what a thing it would be as a client to receive some kind of creation at the end of an engagement saying, here's what I sat down, thought about you, and here's what I made. That'd be
I was coaching, I'm doing some retirement coaching with a lady in France, one of my clients at the moment, and her husband died about 3 months ago, and we had a cup of tea yesterday to reconnect with the coaching. And I did think about writing her a poem, actually, because you watch sometimes people, you watch them change during a session, don't you? And it's more visible in this medium than it is if they're sitting opposite you for some reason.
Ah, interesting. What do you think that there's something you can see more online that you don't necessarily see in person?
Yeah, I don't know why, but I just think it's very, very concentrated online.
Right, yeah.
And you can make lots of notes without it being intrusive, whereas when you were face to face, if you were making notes, you could see, couldn't you?
It's so true. It's so true, as I have been doing during this call. But it's like, yeah, it's a really good point. That there is something different. I guess I just never, you're right. There's like you've got that kind of, whatever someone has chosen as their framing of them, you've got that very concentrated thing. And also, I guess we're probably more concentrated into sight than we are if we're in person, because if we're in person, we've also got sight and sound. I guess we've got more senses available when we're in person as well.
Well, what's interesting is I used to do telephone coaching and telephone supervision, and I didn't use Skype. And then when the pandemic, just before the pandemic happened, I was really worried about my mum in the nursing home, and I've done some training in EFT, emotional freedom therapy, tapping. I don't know if you've heard of it, tapping.
Yeah. Again, I have. Just through a strange sequence of events, but I think just for people who haven't heard of it, again, do you want to just give a little intro to that as well? Because it's interesting, right?
Tapping is we have different meridian points in our body, so it's a bit like, it's described as emotional acupuncture, and what you do is you tap on these meridian points, and it's a way of expressing feelings or concerns or patterns and creating new ones. So if you look up there'll be an EFT practitioner in your area. So the guy I had done the level 1 training with, I don't want to be a practitioner, I just wanted to use it for myself, and as it might have been a tool I could share with my clients, but not in a deep therapeutic way. And he said, well, we can certainly do a session. So, all the news was coming in nursing homes in Italy, and I was just really worried, and I was getting really anxious. So I thought some tapping would help. So he said, well, we can do it on Zoom, or there's a therapy room that, was always more expensive. Oh, no, I said, I don't do Zoom. So I'll pay for the therapy room, which now seems bizarre. So we had the therapy. Anyway, then my introduction to Zoom really was, he started off a online tapping group 3 times a week when the pandemic hit. Mm-hmm. And there was a group of about 8 of us who would meet Monday lunchtime, Wednesday evening, Friday morning, if you could, and we would tap on anything. It was called intentional tapping. So it was tapping on whatever was happening, just to let go of it and diffuse it. So really, I'm now quite the girl about Zoom. I love it.
Yeah.
But I was so negative about it before. I think I was a bit scared of the technology but I really like it now. And I think it's changing the way I'm working because I really like it and I'm really comfortable with it. And one of the things I think I'm really good at doing, I'm a member of the Association of Coaching, and there's a health and social care group which meet once a month. And it was last night we met, a co-coaching group. And what
so it's for coaches who work in health and social care?
Yes. So Association of Coaching has lots of different themed groups. And you'd meet as a big group. So sometimes there's 16 people. Last night there was 10. And there'd be a question we'd talk about. And then you'd go off into Zoom rooms to do some co-coaching. And what I noticed was some people were really uncomfortable with this space. And of course, that transfers. It would transfer onto your client. It transferred into the co-coaching. And one person who was a very accomplished professional, she started off by saying, right, well, yes, I'm the coach. And of course, we're not face to face. And I said, hang on, can we pause a minute? We would never meet face to face because you're in Wales and I'm in Newcastle. Isn't it fabulous that we're here today? So why don't we make the most of it? So what I noticed was some people are so worried about it. And I think what we have to think about as coaches is how that transfers into our client's space.
Yeah, it's like it's so easily done. You know, this is a kind of semi-trivial example, but we did some antenatal classes and we did them online because that was the time during the virus. And as someone who's done quite a lot of work online, I was really aware of that thing that you've just said, but the person running the NCT classes was constantly essentially apologizing for being online and explaining to us what we were missing out on by not being in person. And, you know, we didn't know any better. And it only slowed down the learning.
Yes.
You know, and I think it's the same. It's like, it's really important to, well, I guess what we're saying probably is it's really important to practice so that we're comfortable in an environment that environments we're coaching in, but also that it's important to be aware of how our discomfort, and brings us almost full circle back to supervision, right?
Yes.
Be aware of how our discomfort can pass on to the clients.
And actually, to make the space your own.
Yeah.
So, you know, feeling comfortable, looking at yourself before you start the session, feeling comfortable with, and actually, it's okay. And if you feel uncomfortable, talk to somebody about it so that they can help you feel comfortable. Our brains focus on what we say. So, you know, some people would go to that antenatal class, and if you didn't know any differently, you'd suddenly feel like you were missing out. Whereas because they said it, rather than saying, you know, don't apologize, just be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was just thinking about, I think we talked about this before we switched on, but it's like for people, we'll put the video up at some point, but first of all, people will listen by audio. And you're talking about be comfortable in the space you're in.
Yes.
And you are in what looks like, to me, a wonderful space to be comfortable in. People who are listening, like in the back, it's colorful. There's like a really colorful cushion I can see, and some really nice stones and books, and the picture of Zander with Fiona, and their computer, and lots of nice pictures and other things. I wonder, like, is this the space that you do you I don't know if you in normal times would meet clients there, but it's like, or is it just a space for you, and how have you created that space, and what does it feel like to be in there?
So this is my office. I'm working from home because I've worked from home for a long time, and I've chosen this space, which I think is a really important thing to think about at the moment. I'm constantly saying to people who I'm coaching, who are working from home at the moment, you're working from home in a pandemic. That isn't the environment you would choose to work in, because people, you know, it's a bit like homeschooling. Some people choose, their children have never gone to school, they chose to homeschool. Homeschooling during the pandemic was completely different. It was during the pandemic, it was an emergency situation, and I think they're two really important things we need to separate out. So this is my space, and I love it. There's a mermaid over there. There's an elephant over there with a visor on. I love it. I used to have some clients would come here, I think now I probably won't. I think I'll use Zoom. I might go and see clients and maybe do walking sessions or go into organisations. But I like this space.
And why do you think you won't go back to seeing clients in person there?
Well, I will see clients in person, but they won't come. I won't have them coming to my office anymore.
Why not?
Well, very practical reasons. My office is in my house.
Yeah.
So I have found myself frantically hoovering before somebody comes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that, but that's, yeah.
I think it's a really, but that speaks also to what we've just said, which you've got to be comfortable, right? You don't want to be, well, and it speaks a little bit to something I know is part of your story, which is making your work fit with what's happening in your life. And it's like, actually, I know you're laughing about it, but it's like, I think that's a really good reason to not do something.
Yeah.
That it makes your life feel disrupted, because I would be the same. Like, one of the reasons, there's a few reasons I wouldn't want to meet clients here, but one of them is exactly that. It's like, we've just been talking about how the environment you're in when you're coaching is important. And, I know that this flat is not the ideal environment for some coaching.
I think the other thing is that if someone's having an hour's coaching session or 90 minutes, whatever, then they have to then add on half an hour or 45 minutes to travel and settle in and, get them a cup of tea or whatever. Whereas people are there for whatever the time with a cup of tea, and they're comfortable in their own space.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It doesn't always work for everybody, though, in which case then, there would be, that I've never ever been the sort of person who, I know some coaches who used to pre-COVID meet in hotel foyers and things, but I always see people that I know. So I've never felt comfortable doing that.
Yeah. And also I used to do work in more public spaces, and they're just a little bit too much outside of my control for my liking. Like, it's not the end of the world. It's quite fun to have something really disrupt a coaching session, and then to see what happens in the session when that goes on. But it can be a bit much, and you don't always want to be leaving that. I don't always want to be leaving that stuff to chance.
And usually there's some psychodynamic aspect. Even if someone's just coming for interview skills, it may be something happened in their childhood that impacted on their confidence, and then before you know it, they're distressed. I don't want to be, having that happen in a hotel foyer or somewhere where other people are around. I just don't feel it works for some people. I think we're all different and unique, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to catch, before we go too far on, the book you're working on that you mentioned about the pandemic and the kind of lessons from it and that kind of thing. And I wonder, from the research or thinking you've done so far, if you don't mind sharing some of the thoughts that you've had about that, like, where have you got to with it? Because it's I think in some ways, probably we're going to be asking ourselves questions about this period in history for quite a long time. And I'm just really curious to know what you've discovered or reflected on so far.
Well, it feels like a moment in time. We've never ever, I've got a file there, which, amongst other things, has the letter from the Prime Minister that he sent us all. Do you remember when we all received that?
Oh, no.
Do you not remember it? No. We all received it. No, we all received it from Boris on headed paper. And it says at the top, the Prime Minister, and then I'm writing to you to update you on the steps we are taking to combat coronavirus, blah, 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 blah. This is why we are giving one simple instruction. You must stay at home.
So that's from last March, is it? Like, when it was really starting, right? Wow. Yeah.
Yes. So we all received that letter, and it was signed by Boris himself. So I've got all sorts of things in this file. So I'm interviewing people. I've met people mainly through the How to Be Brilliant group and some of the other groups I've been part of, who've a lovely lady called Kellen in America who's changed her job completely and now is creating cards. Her business is called Cards That Wow. She's creating cards. She's writing a book about pokes. And you know, I've interviewed my friend and ex-colleague Kath Mannix, who came out of retirement, went back into the NHS, worked supporting people. So talking about her experiences. I'm going to be talking to the undertaker, who, because my mum's funeral was one of those funerals where you could only have 6 people. And Josie was the undertaker, and I had a long conversation with her when I went to organise the funeral about the difference pre-pandemic and during pandemic, you know, about how different funerals are and their practice. And so there's going to be some stories, some practical, and I want to weave in some sort of coaching strategy, some strategies on, I think I'm going to call the book different, something about we're all in different boats, but in the same storm. Oh, different boats, same storm, and then something about keeping calm and carrying on, because that's what we're having to do. I don't know if you've heard people talking about the corona coaster, which is a bit like a roller coaster. And that's what this virus is like, isn't it? There are waves and there are peaks and troughs for all of us, and they're all different depending on where we are. So that's what I'm hoping my book's going to be. I'm hoping that it's going to resonate with people. It's been tough to write because to start off, I have to write the story of my mum. And that's what's been getting in the way a bit. So I had a bit of a block, but I'm starting to write it again now. So, yeah. And she would have been really happy that I was writing it. She would have said, wow, because our dementia meant at the end of her life, that was the only word she could say, wow. But it was very expressive. You knew if it was a disgruntled or an amazed wow, you know. So, yeah, I like writing, but actually, I think the other thing I'm discovering is I like writing poetry. So I think I might have quite a few poems in this as well.
Yeah. Well, I think if that poem you read is anything to go by, that's a good idea, and I think that will resonate with people. I think that the title, both parts of the title, was a different boat, same storm, and keeping calm and carrying on. They're both descriptive and a bit poetic as well, which is lovely. Obviously, I'm aware of time, Fiona, and we've been talking for quite a long time, and so I'm aware that a part of my job is to, in the end, draw this conversation to a close. Although that's not such a fun thing to do, I could happily talk on for much longer. That's obviously one thing that's coming up for you. I'm curious, like, what else is coming up for you in your work or life that you're interested in or excited about?
I think appreciating, I think one of the things many of the things that have happened during the last 18 months have made me really appreciate my family, my husband, my son, our 3 cats, and Millie, the 3-legged puppy that we have. I spent a lot of time walking her, listening to podcasts. There's a field not far from here. She had to have her leg amputated because she was knocked down by a car. And so when she's walking, she hops a bit. When she's off the lead in this field, she gallops like a horse. She's amazing, and she's so joyous. And I think one of the things that I've really loved is the simplicity of, with a dog, you throw a ball, they get very excited, they wag their tail, they run, they forget about everything else. In that moment, that's the most important thing. And I think there's something to learn about that, about being present and in the moment. And that's what I love about coaching, actually. I love helping people be in the moment, and helping them move forward to wherever they want to go. Somebody once said to me, I had some therapy a few years ago, and the therapist said, oh, have you never thought of training as a therapist? And I said, I think you do a wonderful job, but I'm much more interested in the present and the future. So I'll often, if somebody needs to have some counselling, that they not refer them, but there's all sorts of resources that people can access for that. Very clear with boundaries around that. But I love helping people be in their present and their moment, and the ideas of the possibilities that can move into. So what I'm hoping I'll be able to do is, I think I'd like to do more retirement coaching. maybe maternity coaching. I think maybe after what you were saying, I think maybe think about a new website, and yeah, maybe some podcasting. Actually, that's something I'd be interested in.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely. I would love to listen to your conversations with both Undertaker and your friend, like all those conversations you were just talking about coronavirus.
Yeah.
Would love to hear them. And obviously, well, perhaps not obvious to you. I imagine you'd have some great conversations if you did some podcasting.
I've never ever. Do you know what? When my little boy was probably about 6 or 7, you have a conversation about not talking to strangers, and he said, Mum, you talk to everybody. So I do. I love talking to people. I guess it's just that curiosity. I've made friends with where Millie's Field is up the road. There's a bowling green, and there's a man called Alan there who's 81, and he lives in a block of flats. He has no outdoor space, but his bowling green has been his space. And he has tended to that. It's immaculate. So I've had some lovely conversations with him. I'm trying to persuade him to let me interview him for my book, but he's a little bit reticent. He's 81. He has steak once a year on his birthday, and he's not sure about being. But he did want me to join the bowling club.
Maybe you should.
Maybe I should.
Yeah. Fiona, it's like the last few minutes are really beautiful. Lovely to hear what you're kind of looking forward to and excited about. Is there anything that I think we've touched on so many parts of your story.
Yes.
Before we finish, is there anything that either we haven't touched on that you want to share, or that we've touched on but haven't kind of got to something about it? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
before we bring the conversation to a close.
Just thought of something, which is that one of the other things I really enjoy doing is coaching supervision. And I think that just holding the space for coaches and shining a light on practice. When I teach supervision, often what happens at the start of a course is, or if I'm introducing it to an organisation, people will say, do I have to call it that? So I say, okay, let's have a conversation, and I get them to think about what else we could call it. We'll go round the houses, and guess what we'll come back to? Supervision. So I break it down into supervision. So it's having a different way of looking at something, supervision. And it's something I enjoy. You're always learning as a supervisor. So I think that's something I'd like to do more of.
Yeah, and that's I love supervision. That is so much better than supervision. So I'm glad I'm glad you come back to the same place, but it's better. That's much better. Like, maybe before we finish then, Fiona, there's just something about that, like from the supervision you've done, and I think you're right. Like, one of the reasons I love sometimes working with other coaches is that, well, I learn from all my clients, but there's something, that particular about working with other coaches, because I definitely learn from them and from being with them in the challenges or the opportunities they're in. Are there particular things that you feel like you've learned, or are there things that when you've supervised other coaches, or perhaps you've supervised more broadly, you've seen come up again and again?
Yeah, people being really hard on themselves, feeling that they're not doing what they're doing is not good enough. Are they making a difference? Have they done it right? And I think that when you are able to give someone space to unpack whatever it is and to look at it, and what I'll often do is write it down as people are saying it and then hold it up so they can see it. Because I think when you hold it in your head, you can't see it. If you write it down, which is why getting people to reflect in a book, or I have a little portable flip chart that I write things on so that people can see it. You can see more clearly. I was going to burst into song there, but I won't.
Sad. We could have got the song as well just before the end, Fiona.
I can see clearly now.
Right.
Yes. So yes. So I think. Yeah. So I think in supervision, it gives you yeah. So it gives people a chance to see that perhaps it was a difficult situation, and actually you did the best you could.
Yeah.
Can you learn from it? Always. There's always something to learn. And if you use the model, if you use the adult learning cycle, it's a cycle that's we're always working around it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that feels like a really important message, actually. I mean, I'm sure it's true for people probably across the helping professions, really, who often get into them because they want to make a difference. And to be asking themselves, that wasn't good enough. Did I do it right? Have I made enough of a difference? Yeah, it's like, what do you say? It was a difficult situation, but you did the best you could, and that's almost always the case.
And it was a contribution.
Yeah.
It was, and that's what I learned from being alongside people that were dying, that whatever we do is a contribution.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Fiona, I know that's a big, like you said, that's a big value for you. And one of the things I thought was just, I was looking down, I always get guests to send me some stuff about them so that I've got that. And I was looking down something that you sent me, which included, for example, a list of all the organizations you've done work with. And the thought that went through my mind when I looked down this, especially, and because like for all the reasons we've spoken about in this conversation, healthcare is so much in our minds right now, and this list of healthcare organizations that you've worked with was long and kind of also broad. Like you've touched on that as well. It just occurred to me what a massive contribution you must have made to that, particularly perhaps in that geographical part of the country, part of the world, but also generally. So like, amazing. Thank you for that and also, of course, thank you for this amazing time that you've given us this afternoon, and for being so open about all those experiences. It's been a total pleasure to have you on the podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all the work you're doing, because the podcasts are brilliant.
No, it's really nice to hear that, and now I can imagine the field where you might sometimes listen. So that's really nice as well. But yeah, Fiona, thanks so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Robbie.